History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going back and doing an episode about the legends of Mexico.
Oh, very cool.
Or should I say, Mexico.
Alrighty then.
So we'll go ahead and preface this by saying there's going to be a lot of Latino names in this, some of them that go back to ancient times. Please forgive us. We will try our best with pronunciation. Are you ready to go back?
I'm ready. The country of Mexico is rich with legends and superstition. There are stories of the devil choosing to hang out in a certain alley or a boogeyman that lies in wait for children. Many of the tales told in Mexico mirror tales from around the world that were meant to entice children to behave. Stern warnings of the witch that would carry them off if they cried kept children smiling through dinner. Krampus kept kids in line for Christmas. These stories go back as far as man does. Mexico has its own pile of bad guys and interesting tales. Join us on this journey through the legends of Mexico. But be sure to bring along some salt, violet petals, sage, or ginseng to help keep unwanted ghosts away.
Humans have been in Mesoamerica for at least 13,000 years. Pre-Columbian civilizations like the Olmec, Maya, Toltec, Aztec, and Teotihuacan were here. The Spanish would arrive in the early 1500s and change everything for the Aztecs who were there at that time. The Spanish called this new territory New Spain, and they brought Christianity and European influences and held power for 300 years. In 1821, Mexico finally obtained independence from Spain after their war for independence. Mexicans chose to be governed by monarchy since that's what they knew, and they chose Agustin de Iturbide as their emperor in 1822 because he had led the war for independence. He abdicated in 1823. Boy, that was a short-lived kingship there, or emperorship.
Certainly was.
And Mexico became a republic. The Mexican-American War would come in the mid-1800s. Mexico has had its share of turmoil when it comes to governing, but one thing that has remained from ancient times through to the present are its legends.
One of Mexico's more famous legends is that of Quetzalcoatl. The name comes from the Nahuatl, with Quetzal meaning a bird with beautiful plumage and Coatl meaning snake. So technically, he is the plumed serpent. Quetzalcoatl was a god who had been around when the world was created. He was an outsider who would watch the other gods subjugate humans. This made him very angry, and he decided to become a human so that he could live among them and teach them the secrets of the gods. He ended up coming to Tolán, which is located in the modern state of Hidalgo in Mexico. At the moment of Quetzalcoatl's arrival, a human sacrifice was about to begin in honor of his brother, Tezcatlipoca, and Quetzalcoatl put a stop to it and halted a storm that was coming. The people were amazed, and they wanted to make him their god, but he refused and told them he wanted to teach them, particularly about purity of soul. The town of Tolán thrived, and Quetzalcoatl taught them many things from gardening to astronomy to writing. All of this goodness made his brother angry, and he devised a plan to bring shame to Quetzalcoatl. He disguised himself as an old man and presented Quetzalcoatl with a gift. It was a drink that was very delicious and also very intoxicating. Quetzalcoatl drank it down. Now, he had been a god that took pride in his celibacy, But under the influence of this drink, he slept with one of the priestesses of his order, and he was made unclean.
He decided he could no longer lead Toulon, so he built a boat from snakes and sailed toward the setting sun. A boat from snakes? That seems like it'd be a little leaky, don't you think? He told the people of Toulon that he would return one day. Many of us know from history that eventually Hernan Cortez would be mistaken as the returning Quetzalcoatl. That fact gives this story a place in history. There's something else that does that as well, and that is the belief among many historians that Quetzalcoatl was a real man because he's depicted as a white man who was tall with a beard, and that man was a Viking. What makes this story unique is that so many Mesoamerican cultures had Quetzalcoatl stories. Some called him by a different name, but it was in essence the same individual. These cultures include the Incas and the Mayans and the Aymara from Peru. How did Quetzalcoatl get to all these places? It was as if he could fly, like a god, or perhaps in some kind of ship.
Tonacaciguatl is a goddess in Aztec mythos that was considered the goddess of creation, and thus the mother of Quetzalcoatl. She and her husband were believed to transfer the souls of infants from heaven to female wombs. Her themes revolve around death, hope, and ghosts. Her name means Our Lady of Flesh. She gives life, and the spirits of children return to her in death. Angelitos Day is a week-long festival for the dead, mainly children. Cakes are made in honor of the deceased children and put in a special spot, and this encourages Tonacaciguatl to release that child's spirit for the day. The child's picture is also placed next to a candle to help light the way and welcomes the souls of the departed to the festival.
Mictecacihuatl or Mictecacihuatl is another goddess in Aztec mythology who is queen of Mictlan, the underworld. She rules over the afterlife and she keeps watch over the bones of the dead. She also presided over the ancient celebrations of the dead, which today has become Mexico's Day of the Dead. Her backstory is that she was born and then sacrificed when she was still a baby. Her representation was pretty horrific, as she was usually depicted as being defleshed with a gaping jaw that swallows the stars. Eee.
Next we have Calle de la Quemada, which means the burnt woman's street. The story of the burned lady begins with Santa Lucia, or Saint Lucy, who lived from 283 to 304 AD. She was a young woman who became a virgin martyr after consecrating her virginity to God. It seems that her mother promised her to a young man, but Lucy refused to marry him and asked that her dowry be distributed to the poor. Enraged, her betrothed went to the governor of Syracuse, who at the time was martyring Christians. The governor ordered her to burn a sacrifice to the emperor's image, and she refused. She was tied up, and heaps of wood were put on her and set ablaze, but she didn't burn. They next thrust a sword into her throat, and that worked. She is said to be the patron saint of the blind because of two different stories connected to her. One claims she had her eyes gouged out as a form of torture, and another claims she gouged out her own eyes and sent them to her suitor because he thought they were so beautiful and he wouldn't leave her alone. However her eyes came to be removed, they miraculously showed back up in her head right before she was buried, and this gave her sainthood.
The burnt lady was Doña Beatriz, who was the beautiful daughter of the viceroy in Mexico City. It was said that her hair was a silky and shiny black that flowed like a waterfall down her back. She had a lovely face and skin as white as lilies. She was so beautiful that nearly every young man who saw her fell in love with her. One of them, named Martin de Scapoli, became obsessed with her. He attacked any other suitor who approached her and even killed a couple of them. Doña Beatriz was very troubled by this, and she prayed to her patron saint, Santa Lucia. She remembered the story of how Santa Lucia had trouble with a suitor, and so the saint had gouged out her own eyes. Doña Beatriz decided to do something similar and destroy her beauty. She stood before a picture of Santa Lucia, prayed, and then burned her face with hot coals. Can you imagine?
Oh my word.
What an awful thing to do. Her screams brought Father Marcos running to her side, and he tried his best to care for her burns. The story ends in a positive way with Martin running to her side, lifting the black veil that covered her disfigured face, and telling her that he loved her for what was inside her because she'd been a generous and good woman. But what a way to find out if your man really loves you for your inside or if he just has lust with the outside.
Yeah, no kidding.
She spent the rest of her life wearing a black veil, and the street where she lived was named for her. It would have been nice if they'd named it Doña Beatriz rather than the Burn Lady.
True.
Next we have the Cihuateteo.
The Aztecs believed that childbirth was a form of battle, and so a woman who died during it was considered a fallen warrior.
There you go. That's pretty cool, huh?
That woman's spirit was thought to become divine and then go on to the heaven of the sun. But they didn't stay there. On feast days, the Cihuateteo would return to haunt the crossroads looking for young victims. They preferred to go after children, and when they took a child, they would leave behind a sacrificial knife. Cihuateteo appeared to have skeletal faces, and their skin is chalk white. They have claws for hands and usually wear skirts embroidered with bright colors, with black blouses. If you happen to see a Cihuateteo, you could be struck with paralysis, sickness, or become possessed. This could have spawned our next legend.
Who hasn't heard of La Llorona? You've heard of her, right?
Of course.
I mean, they've made movies about her. The Wailing Woman. La Llorona is Spanish for the Wailing Woman. This is a popular legend in many Spanish-speaking countries, including Mexico. The story goes a woman possibly called Maria witnessed her husband with another woman and in a fit of rage drowns her children in a river as revenge. She immediately regretted what she had done and drowns herself as well. For many years, her spirit roams the river banks wailing, "Ay mis hijos, oh my children." This legend is often told to children by their parents as a cautionary tale to prevent those children from going out at night. They'll often say, "Don't go out after dark or La Llorona will get you," warning that La Llorona will kidnap them and drag them into the river. Similar legends exist in other cultures such as the Gaelic Banshee.
La Llorona is sometimes identified as La Malinche, the Aztec woman who served as Hernan Cortez's interpreter, go-between, and mistress, who betrayed her people by warning Cortez of an oncoming attack by the Aztecs, resulting in the eventual conquest of Mexico by the Spaniards. La Malinche did indeed bore Cortez's 2 sons. The connection between La Malinche and La Llorona is another legend. As the story goes, the king of Spain wanted Cortez to come back to Spain and sent a beautiful woman to entice him to come back. This beautiful woman seduces Cortez and convinces him to return to Spain and to bring his 2 sons along with him. When La Malinche learns of his plan, she flees with her children. Cortez sends his soldiers to find her. They meet her at a riverbank where the soldiers stab the babies in the heart and toss them into the river. La Malinche is overcome by grief and walks on the riverbanks for days and nights, crying for her children until the day of her death. There really is nothing to substantiate this story. In reality, La Malinche did indeed bear Cortez a son, whom they named Martin. He went on to live a full, long life. Cortez baptized her into the Catholic faith and changed her name to Marina. After the birth of her son, Cortez built a house for Marina to live in. When Martin was 6 years old, he returned to Spain with his father where he grew up.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Next we have La Planchada. La Planchada is the spirit of a nurse with an impeccably neat and ironed uniform, hence the meaning of her name, the Ironed Lady. She heals patients in hospitals around Mexico. In Mexico City's Juarez Hospital during the 1930s, doctors noticed that patients' conditions were miraculously improving. These patients claimed to have been visited by a nurse during the night who sat with them and talked to them until they fell asleep. When they woke in the morning, they felt much better than they had the previous day and were often cured of the ailments. One source claims that the nurse in life was named Eulalia, who had fallen in love with a young, handsome doctor who joined the staff. They started seeing each other and were soon engaged. Shortly after the doctor left to attend a seminar in another city, Eulalia did not hear from him for several weeks and she grew worried. She later found out that the doctor had met another woman at the seminar and never returned to the hospital, and Eulalia never heard from him again. She became very depressed and her work was suffering. One of the patients died from an error that Eulalia had made, and this was because she was distracted. She soon became very ill herself and was overcome with guilt from letting this patient die in her care that she wasted away and soon died. Today, patients are supposedly visited by this spirit. They see her in a very neat, old-fashioned style nurse's uniform. Some think she's a living nurse, but then they realize that her footfalls do not make any sound. Others have said she's surrounded by an unearthly glow, which exudes peace and calm, often thinking she is an angel. Next we have La Ciguanaba.
La Ciguanaba is known by several names, most of which are derivatives meaning net woman. This is a shape-shifting spirit that looks like a woman from behind, but as something quite different from the front. A woman named Spooky Jean over on TikTok shares a story in which several friends were driving around in a car late at night near a very dark woods. One of the men really needed to relieve himself.
As you do.
So he asked his friend who was driving to pull over. He got out and went into the woods a little ways and started to take care of business. Suddenly, he noticed a woman a little off in the distance. He finished up and decided to approach her because it was dangerous for a woman to be alone in these woods. As he got closer, he could see that she had long dark hair and was wearing a dress. He called out, but she didn't turn around, so he tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Hello, I am a little worried about you being out here alone. We could give you a ride home." When the woman turned around, he was horrified to see that she had the face of a horse.
Talk about calling a woman horseface.
So the guy took off screaming and told his friends to drive fast to get away. As they drove, he told his friends what he saw, and they never returned to that place. And that's a good thing because La Ciguanaba lures men away to danger, usually their death. Some stories feature her naked and bathing or washing clothing. To lure children, she may take on the appearance of their mother. Making the sign of the cross sometimes works to detour her.
Next, we have the vampire tree. In the city of Guadalajara during colonial times, there was a rich European man named Jorge. He was a mysterious man and nobody knew much about him. All they knew was that he never came out during the day, preferring to roam the city at night. People started complaining that their pets were disappearing. These animals would later show up dead. Residents started suspecting that something strange was going on because the animals were drained of blood.
Dun, dun, dun.
Ah! This phenomenon started happening with babies and then children, and not only were they drained of blood, they had 2 puncture wounds on their bodies. What do you think it could be, Kelly?
A snake?
I'm sure it's a snake.
A bat?
It could be a vampire bat. Locals started remaining indoors at night, except for a brave handful that decided to go out into the night and find out what was going on. Outside of the Belen Pantheon Cemetery, the group witnessed Jorge biting the neck of a person. They had suspected they had a vampire in their town, and now they knew they were right. They decided to set a trap to catch him the next night outside of the cemetery, and they managed to capture him. They dragged him inside the cemetery, drove a long stake through his heart, and buried the body. A little while later, a tree grew above the burial and remains as a giant gnarled tree to this day. I'll see if I can get a picture of it and I'll put it up on Instagram. Officials have erected a fence around the tree to protect it, which is a good idea since many people are tempted to cut off its branches to see if the rumors of it flowing with blood are true. How many vampire trees are there out there? I don't know that there's that many vampire trees. There's a lot of devil's trees.
I've never even heard of either one.
Well, we do have that one that's here in Florida that is connected to that serial killer. We did a phantasmal crime about it.
I guess I'm blanking on that.
I'm going to have to make you listen back to the archive.
I've listened to all of them, but there's many.
Now, this final bad guy, I love his name. Kukui.
That's a Hawaiian nut.
I know it is. They're those little black ones that you can only get from a kukui tree.
Yeah. El Kukui is also known as El Coco or El Cuco. Strangely, the word pretty much translates as coconut, although colloquially, the word can mean skull. The myth originated in Portugal and Galicia as Coco, and is referred to as the child eater. The Coco is a monster that eats children who disobey their parents. The monster sounds hideous with long claws, razor-sharp teeth like those of a barracuda, glowing red eyes, and lots of hair on its body, possibly an empty pumpkin for a head, or something else round. And there are even stories that claim it looks like a humanoid alligator.
And I have seen some pictures where it looks like it has a coconut on its head, so I wonder if that's where the name came from.
Maybe. Whatever the head looks like, this thing has one large bat-like ear that can hear children misbehaving anywhere. El Coco goes and gets those children and drags them back to its lair in a cave in the hills or mountains.
The oldest rhyme about El Coco dates back to the 17th century and was written by Juan Callequis, I think is how you say it. Duermete niño, duermete ya, que viene el coco y la comera. Sleep, child, sleep now. Here comes the coco, and he will eat you. What child is going to sleep after you've been told that?
I know I wouldn't.
Come on, little one, go to sleep, because here comes Coco who's going to eat you. I wouldn't be falling asleep. El Coco is also featured prominently in the Francisco Goya painting Que Viene El Coco, where he is depicted as a hooded figure. Sometimes El Coco lays in wait under children's beds, making him the perfect Mexican version of the boogeyman. Parents often use El Coco to scare their children into submission. Don't go into that dark room. El Kukui is in there.
Next, we have El Sombreron. This is the actual boogeyman in Mexico, and he fits the bill to a T. This thing is basically a goblin that is short in stature, wears black, has a large black hat, and tramps around in boots that make a lot of noise. He has this thing for hair and braids. He likes to braid the tails and manes of horses. Or if he sees a woman with long hair, he might braid that.
Kelly, do you understand why I keep my hair short now? I don't want anybody messing with it. You're in trouble.
Oh well.
And you have thick hair.
So be it.
He would love to braid your hair.
Even dogs have found their hair braided by this boogeyman. El Sombreron usually comes around at dusk and has a group of mules in tow who are carrying coal. He also has a silver guitar he serenades beautiful young women with as he sings and dances. But then he puts soil on her plate so she cannot eat food. Anytime she tries to eat, the food just becomes soil. The only way to fix this is to cut her hair and have a priest put holy water on her and pray for her. The boogeyman will then leave her alone and find another maiden to harass.
It seems that this is meant to kind of keep young women virtuous. Be careful what you're doing out there because he's going to lure you into following in his way and entrance you, and then she's not going to be able to eat because every time she eats, she's going to get a mouthful of dirt. I find it fascinating. It doesn't matter what country you're in. There are all these different stories that are told. From us here in America, would hear about the boogeyman under your bed or in the closet, so you better stay in bed. That's probably why they told us that our sheets and stuff would protect us. It would keep us in bed.
Right.
And you wouldn't want to put your feet on the floor because the boogeyman under the bed was going to get them. I think parents put this in kids' heads to get you to stay in bed.
But just one more drink of water.
And you could see, going back to ancient times, they were telling their children these stories, especially around water, which is kind of a good idea because children so easily drown and it doesn't take a whole lot. That'd be a great way to keep kids away from the water. There's a monster in that water that's going to get you. It's going to pull you in. It's going to do all these things to you.
This is true.
Don't go into those scary woods, which, if you're a little kid, why do you want to go in the woods anyway? Whatever creatures, roaming around, the boogeyman, the werewolf, the vampire, they'll get you in the woods. It's a good way to keep kids in line.
Indeed.
And as we know with Christmas, that's why Krampus is around. He's the one to make sure that you keep in line or he's going to take you off and beat you.
Stick you in a sack.
Yeah. Santa's kind of nice about it. He just gives you coal. Wonderful, great stories here. Are these legends of Mexico based on true stories? Did these people actually exist? Or are they just myths? That is for you to decide. Very fascinating. Love these legends of Mexico. Thank you so much for joining us on this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.